Hey everybody, welcome to Advancement Live. You know, technology is always the most fun part about doing episodes of Advancement Live. Leonie had to scurry down from her hotel room to the lobby of the hotel to make this happen. So we did have our ducks in a row, but you know what? It wouldn't be across the world technology if we didn't have, you know, just a little something to make it interesting. My name is Ryan Catherwood, and I'm coming to you live from Charlottesville, Virginia, the home of Thomas Jefferson's University of Virginia. I am a co-host of Advancement Live. My colleague Andrew Gosen and I co-host every Tuesday at 1 p.m. here in the States on the East Coast. And that you guys over in Australia are 13 hours ahead. So welcoming in this evening everyone who is over in Australia, checking out Advancement Live for the first time. Advancement Live is a weekly show for advancement professionals with show topics in the development, fundraising, engagement, and communication space. And we are broadcasting on the Higher Ed network of channels and a product of EdUniverse Media. So, you know, I wanted to talk, before I introduce Leonie, how excited I am to get back in touch and to be talking with someone over in Australia. I studied abroad at the I actually went to graduate school at the University of Queensland 6 years ago, and it is my dream, without question, to one day come back to Australia, not just to visit, but hopefully for a longer period of time. One day, who knows? But our sponsors this afternoon, want to call some attention to our great sponsors here. iModules is the leading constituent engagement management provider. And let me pull up their logo one more time. Or maybe not. iModule software is the leading constituent engagement management provider for educational institutions. iModules delivers an integrated online platform that transforms how institutions strengthen constituent relationships and achieve fundraising success. And one of our new sponsors is Countermarch Solutions. Excuse me, Countermarch Systems. From registration to check-in and participation, Countermarch Systems provides software that alumni and staff love to use. We build comprehensive, easy-to-use systems that handle the complexities of reunions and homecomings so that your staff are free to do the important work of alumni engagement. Our mobile apps provide a platform for alumni networking, social media connectivity before and after the event, and are integration ready for a seamless user experience. Find out more at countermarch.com/reunions. Okay, Leonie, we've done it. We are live. I have read the sponsors, and it's great to see you again. Thanks again for joining the show.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Much appreciated, Ryan.
Yeah, and I know that you've met probably most of the folks who are joining the show to checking it out live, but for those of you who don't know Leonie, she's the Director of Alumni Relations and Communications at the University of Melbourne. She has 9 years of experience in alumni relations at 2 of Australia's top universities, the other being Monash University in Victoria, and over 15 years experience in external and stakeholder relations. Leonie has an arts economics degree from Monash and a master's in business majoring in marketing for nonprofits. She is bilingual and speaks fluent Japanese. I didn't know that, Leonie, until I read this. And spent some years working in government. I guess I'm not sure why I would have. She has developed Melbourne's alumni program over the past 5 years, and her main achievements including the embedding of alumni staff in all faculties, development of a strategic plan, and the trebling of engagement during this time. And in addition, she led the development of the Believe campaign identity and rollout in the University of Melbourne's first campaign in over 60 years, which we'll talk about. All right. So, Leonie, you mentioned when we spoke for the first time that higher education in Australia used to be free. And I mean, that was an amazing fact. How has that impacted alumni relations today? Free seems like it would be a good thing, but not necessarily for alumni engagement purposes.
It's a really interesting point. there is an era, or fees were reintroduced, I should say, in the 80s in Australia, and prior to that, basically students covered their own tuition and living fees and books, etc. So students regarded education as something that they dipped into and dipped out of, and their institutional connections as a result were, I think, to some degree quite loose. Universities didn't either see a need to create strong alumni connections or connections with students either. They spent a lot of time focused on delivering curriculum, and that sense of creation of community was, I think, at the time quite low. For those people who transitioned through to the period where they began to have to pay for an education, I think their sense of the value of a free education is really heightened. And so there's a group of people who realise how privileged those who had a free education really are. And now in hindsight, I think it works in our favour, in that those who did receive a free education genuinely in this day and age see it as a privilege, and realise that not everyone now has that same experience. But I think for many years it was very difficult for institutions to focus on developing communities, and it was not part of people's psyche to think about the university as a place where you would retain an ongoing connection. That was definitely not a high priority for many, other through serendipity.
Yeah, and I think, when we were talking, Leonie, about some of the dynamics that are at play for you, one of the things you also mentioned is that, the vast majority of the University of Melbourne graduates come from around the city of Melbourne. And is that still the case, or have things changed? And so what are the implications from an alumni engagement perspective?
Well, if I focus on numbers for a minute, which hopefully will give some people a little bit of context, the University of Melbourne is 160 years this year, 160 years old. We have 310,000 alumni, living alumni that we know of. And those originally, many of those people, or most of those people, would have come from Melbourne. So up until the 80s, 95% of the student population would have come from within the state of Victoria. That has transitioned over the past 20, 25 years to what is now around about 25% of students coming internationally, 3 or 4% from other states in Australia, and the remainder from Victoria. So it really has shifted substantially in terms of, from an alumni engagement perspective, the areas that we seek to work with and service, as well as the mix of expectations and the mix of desires, because many international students are very, very conscious of the alumni community and very much want to be part of that, sometimes more so than some of the locals who can, in certain circumstances, take it for granted.
That's interesting. So you've got a large contingent, a growing contingent of international students, combined with a fairly sizable local group of Australian nationals. So what is it that your alumni want? And your biggest champions right now, the folks who are the most engaged, what is it that they'd like to see you guys do?
It was interesting. I'm in Sydney at the moment, and we were just having some discussions this morning with some of our key champions here in Sydney, and this is not an unusual request, but many people who've studied at the university have a desire for intellectual discussion and discourse. So they like learning, they want to stay on top of current issues, they want to stay ahead of what's happening, and they assume that the university is part of that discourse. So most people would like to hear from academics what they want to hear the university's perspective on key topical issues, whether that's bushfire management, which is a big issue here obviously at the moment. It's summer here in Australia, and Sydney's had major bushfires, so it's disaster management, or it might be water management, or it might be higher education funding, or it might be immigration policy. The university's capacity to stimulate and encourage debate is one thing, social connections are another. And I think increasingly, and linked back, Ryan, to your point before, because we have a diverse population of alumni worldwide, we also have a desire from alumni to connect with people not just within the Melbourne law fraternity, but throughout the world. So directories that enable alumni themselves to step in and locate their colleagues is also something I think high on the list of many people.
And one of the things, Leonie, when I was doing some homework about you guys right now, you're looking to sort of revamp, retool your website in order to better reach these folks and to kind of communicate broadly about your programs. You were asking for feedback on the website in general, and switching gears just a little bit, could you talk about some of the information that's been offered, how you've requested it, what's been the engagement result of that sort of request for help? Because I think that's perhaps one place to start, or an angle to take when it comes to bringing people into the fold, ask for advice.
Absolutely. And it's been interesting because some of our alumni groups have taken that charge quite seriously, and amongst themselves have sat down and said, if this were to look better, what might it look like? What would its functionality be? Visually, would it look different? Content-wise, would it look different? And we've had a number of different alumni groups who've consolidated feedback and provided that to us. We have an e-news that goes out monthly, and there have been people who that will prompt them to think, oh, that's right, I wanted to convey my thoughts on website and or other program content, and they will write independently and offer views. And we've been in a process, I suppose, from the last 4 to 6 months of consolidating some of that feedback, going back to see what we might do. I think there's a strong sense amongst the community that our platform is still perhaps a little bit too one-way. It needs to be a little more two-way, and it certainly needs to be a hub, and at the moment it operates a little bit more as a traditional website, which is just simply a repository of information as opposed to a hub for information. So there's definitely a trajectory that we're heading down in redefining our website and what its functionality is. Universities are, as you know, places that like to have lots and lots of information stored everywhere, but it's what we do with it and how we organise it and how much we share that and two-way share that with people that matters to alumni.
I think that's great, and I hope you guys get tons of feedback, and hopefully a bunch of folks are out there listening that would be willing to offer some help. When we spoke for prep for the show, you had mentioned that the challenge is perhaps to sort of teach the value of the alumni network itself, maybe networking in general. You sort of indicated that maybe there isn't this sort of culture of the alumni network as being a catalyst for building connections, fostering professional growth, personal growth through that outreach. Is this something your team struggles with? Did I get that right in terms of the dynamic?
It feeds in a little bit to the discussion before, which is if people traditionally haven't seen an alumni community as a network, then when they're in the environment where there are other alumni, they almost have to, sometimes from my perspective, it helps to remind them that that is the case. So we might hold events that are of interest. The university has a gallery, and we hold events where curators might come and provide if you like, an educational tour of some of the fascinating things that are inside the gallery, and people will come because that's their interest. And if you remind them that in fact there are now 150 people in the room with a common interest in classics or modern art, whatever it might be, all of a sudden people realise that they can have conversations beyond just coming to hear what they wanted to hear. And I find it very useful, and it functions to remind people of that service and say, if you leave the room today without having met two new people, what a missed opportunity. And you see all these people look up and go, absolutely, oh, I should have thought of that. It's not something people do innately, unless it's really branded as a speed dating.
Speed dating.
So we do.
We've tried that here. No, just kidding.
Have you?
Not in so many words,
worked.
not in so many words, but maybe just sort of by the environment we set up sometimes. You sort of, and I didn't mean to interrupt you, Leonie. You had sort of wrote in your notes, are Australians quite shy?
Yeah, I think if I'm going to compare, it's dangerous ground and generalisations. So,
This is true. Fair enough.
There are some caveats around this, but Australians are more inclined, I think, to sit back rather than throw themselves forward in situations, and so networking is presented as quite a proactive exercise. If given permission, which is sort of what I was saying before, if given permission, Australians will take their own version of it, and it can work for them. But I think unless, or even in business situations, it's a softer kind of approach than perhaps something that I would sense as a more traditional US approach, where that's expected. Most people putting themselves forward is expected. So encouraging that to happen is part of what we need to do, and what we do, as I said. We have a program where we invite, it's called a career round table, and we invite 15 or 20 senior alumni, and they sit at a table, and we invite recent graduates and sometimes final year students, and they get 10 or 15 minutes to network at a table with one of these speakers, and they go around the table. By the end of the night, they're doing it very naturally, but at the beginning, they look terrified when they come into the room. They actually have to work these tables. So, it's a learned behaviour, and providing opportunities and kind of suggestions around how to make that happen is definitely part of how I think things work better here anyway.
So you actually, so in a sense, have you tried, or do you consider a program that you would offer alumni, being like how to work a room, how to network? Is that something that you would consider?
It's an interesting thing you say that, because a couple of years ago at a case conference, I ran a session called How to Work a Room, thinking all of my colleagues will of course know this. This is only Australians that are a little bit backward in coming forward. And in fact, it was in the Asia Pacific region, and it was full. And it went down incredibly well, and a couple of universities asked me to do it on their campuses. I would think that as a young alumni event here, yeah, it would be something that there'd be some interest in, as much as people could summons up the courage to come along. That's there's a hurdle in the nature of the topic in itself, right? But it's a good idea, and one I think Australians genuinely like to try and. There's a desire to work out how to do it. People know they need to. High school and university doesn't necessarily prepare people to come away with that skill naturally.
And so sort of connecting those pieces, right, are the idea of the regional networking groups, the regional club. We call them clubs here at the University of Virginia, whereby you've got, sort of the big purpose is for everybody to get together, have a series of events throughout the year that are organized by the volunteers, that are sort of localized in the sense that they, local restaurants or local volunteer opportunities, all sort of underneath the flag of the university. So when it comes to establishing those groups, Leonie, at the University of Melbourne, what's sort of been working the best? And I know it's sort of that's one of the big things you're working on is recruiting and training volunteers to run those sort of regional networking groups.
So we have, as I said, an interesting thing is that in Australia, because of the heavy international population, the Asia Pacific groups tend to be ones where we have the critical mass of alumni, and so for us, there are 5 or 6 locations in the Asia Pacific that are real hubs in that regard, and the local alumni really appreciate first and foremost the fact that in some instances we need to assist in the actual structure of an alumni body, that legally and from a governance framework, different countries have different requirements around how these groups can form, and so being understanding of that and supporting that is, I think, much more important than people might otherwise think. Secondly, it's definitely about making sure that the senior members of those groups are given opportunities to meet with senior staff when they're in country. And thirdly, it's definitely, as you mentioned, it's about enabling localised things to happen. So things that in Australia we might think are pretty normal might not be the right thing to happen in Hong Kong or in Malaysia. And, so we have, this week we have a car rally happening in Singapore.
Cool.
And we've had, we've had bay walks in Hong Kong, and we've had visits to orphanages in Singapore, and we've had, all kinds of different things that, at first blush in Australia, we might say, is that genuinely a good thing to be doing? When in fact, from a local perspective, that's exactly what they want to do.
Yeah. And the thought just popped into my head, Leonie, that you've got this interesting dynamic where you have the large international contingent, and they could have sort of almost countrywide alumni groups, but because your alumni base is so localized around Melbourne, you would almost need neighborhood or suburb groups, right? And on sort of any given block in Melbourne, would there be enough alumni to have a critical mass for a networking group?
It's an interesting thought. Maybe we should team up with Google and do a map plotting exercise.
Yeah.
We would certainly have concentrations of alumni in certain suburbs. And as you indicated, there's an enormous group of people in Melbourne, many of whom already associate through professional groupings. There's an active fraternity of lawyers. There is a very close-knit group of doctors and veterinary scientists. There's a strong connection of performers and musicians through connections who connect not necessarily in the way that everyone has formed a society and they conduct regular activities. Much of it happens in a less formal way, but certainly in Australia, enabling that to happen and not formalising it in Australia has to a large extent enabled the continuity of it. Setting too many restrictions around activity, I think certainly in Australia sends warning signals to locals that they don't want bureaucracy attached. So there was an association years ago, an alumni association of Melbourne years ago, and it's become absorbed into the university just because the bureaucracy of it became the only thing that survived, and if you like, that was bigger than the activity happening. So people prefer to be nimbler in their connecting and they're getting together, and our challenge is to make sure that we support and sustain it without stifling it.
So with that in mind, where is your program, your regional program, we'll say, sort of focusing on perhaps the international desires? What are the goals as far as recruiting volunteers and sort of 5 years from now, if you had a best case scenario?
I'll give you my crystal ball.
Yeah.
We certainly have, as I indicated, a broadening alumni base. So whilst we have some traditional locations that we will continue to support and strengthen, we also have locations that include some of Southeast Asia, and Cambodia and Vietnam are areas we certainly would seek to be strengthening. South America is an area for us that looms large, interestingly enough. Sri Lanka is an area that's growing for us as well. I think there's a lot of discussion at the moment about building a stronger alumni ambassador program. So again, this is a way of encouraging people to be able to be supported without overloading them with too much bureaucracy. They need to be supported by us, to be given priority in terms of information or access or support when and where a good idea or a good opportunity comes up, but not necessarily requiring everyone to have to go and form an association, create a treasurer and a captain and a vice captain. A network of formalised ambassadors who also even if it was biannually, could connect with each other, and who certainly in a social media sense were actively connected with each other. LinkedIn's clearly for us a very enabling platform. Our US LinkedIn group is really, people in the US really understand the power, I think, of LinkedIn, and I'd hope that our volunteer connections are as active online as they might be in terms of their face-to-face programs.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you mentioned there is the idea of having really a volunteer-driven program, and I think that's exactly what we shoot for here at the University of Virginia. We sort of provide a framework and a series of systems so that we sort of act as a support when we want to try to help our clubs market their events, right?
Yes.
If they've got some sort of so when a club wants to have an event, we have an event request submission process that gets things up onto our calendar, that gets things up onto their web pages, that gets an email up and out and a registration form made, and we do about 1,200 events a year all over the world. And one of the things that we sort of discovered is that there are blips on the screen, right, in terms of clubs who take volunteer-driven a little further down the spectrum than we would like. Because we do want them to consult with us about what they're doing, and some of them don't necessarily do that all the time, and it's just sort of the nature of the beast. You want them to be engaged, and you want them to use the framework you've developed, but you don't necessarily want them to take the ball and totally run with it.
That's right, and I think there's a really important point there, and that is, there is a very delicate balance between the university, which increasingly is conscious of its brand and is conscious of reinforcing the brand in a positive way, and if we are not good at conveying what our core attributes and our core values are, we run the risk, as you say, of people with very good intentions and very sometimes really creative ideas, perhaps inadvertently sending messages that are counter to what the university is hoping that we'd be trying to say. And so, having strong enough relations that with those key people to enable robust discussion to happen and to enable people to question us, and for us to be able, again, to go back and say, okay, well, is a beer swilling night really going to run the essence of what a good alumni connection's about?
I was just going to say, it's. Is there a coffee shop right there to your left or to your right?
There's one to my right.
Sometimes I can hear the foam or the steamer for the milk. It's good.
Apologies for the background noise. I can't send you the coffee smell.
It's giving this Google Hangout lots of character. There's no doubt about that. Leonie, I was looking at your website, and there's the idea of the regional groups, right? But then there's the idea that you want to bring people back to campus. You want people to experience the university again by actually being on its grounds. And I was noticing on your website you had the School of Chemistry had an 80s reunion on the calendar coming up. And that brought forth a number of different questions, but the first one was, does that sort of event work? Do people register? Do people have good reports on those?
If we go back to our original question, given that for certain periods of time, alumni didn't, because the communities went strong, reunions were not a core part of culture for many years, for many cohorts, not for all, but for many. In the last 5 or 6 years, the university's played a stronger role in enabling some of those reunions to happen. So again, it goes back to the notion of some key volunteers saying, we want a reunion, we'd like to run something. Then the university stepping in and making that as possible as we can. This year, we, for the first time, had a major reunion of everyone who graduated before 1963. So everyone who graduated 50 years ago or more. The response was overwhelming. It was quite astonishing, and
that's great.
we filled a room of 500 plus people whose average age was about 83, and they had the most amazing. Some of them hadn't been back to campus for possibly 45 years, and it was a very momentous occasion for many of them. I can't tell you how many thank you letters we had from people who found it absolutely profound. So clearly there's a time and a place for these things. On the other hand, there have been others where the numbers are very discreet and small. I don't know that it draws people there. We've had other reunions for people who were perhaps in their 30s and 40s, and they're time poor. And as you indicated before, most of them live round or near the university. They know the university's there. They've probably driven past once in the last couple of months. What's new is their question. They could meet in a pub somewhere else. So there is a question of finding the right location, finding the right timing in terms of people's own life cycles. When's a good time to celebrate something and actually make a mark of it? And there's also definitely a sense of importance of involving staff. People will come back if they know that they can connect with some of their former teachers or tutors or professors, and that's new for the staff as well. They would be involved in that kind of activity, and it's certainly making progress. There's definitely staff who understand the power for them as well as the alumni in getting back together again and watching what evolves from their own teaching of young adults. So it's evolving. I think it's strengthening over time, but you're right. It doesn't always work just because we've decided we think it's a good idea.
Yeah. What I was going to mention, one of the things that I wanted to give some of my credit to some of my colleagues here at UVA, one of the initiatives they just started was really an effort at young alumni engagement, and they...
Right.
We start the whole reunion cycle beginning on your 5th year, right? Your milestone years, 5 all the way up through. And so we realized we were sort of missing these alumni right after they graduated, years 1 through 4. So what they did was they planned this really a blowout party at the Greek Theater here on campus, and it's engineered just for years 1, 2, 3, and 4. Led by sort of a group of alumni committee for each year, and the idea is to just keep them engaged and develop this weekend every year, and it's gone up to, I think we had 3,000 come back this past weekend to lead up to that 5th year reunion. So that was a cool opportunity, perhaps. I don't know how you guys feel about massive blowout parties on your grounds.
Can I ask a question? Brian, you said it was student-led. Is that right?
Well, so my colleagues in the Alumni Association here at the university sort of engineered this, right? So they certainly provided the resources, but really sort of relied on the students to tell them what they wanted.
Fantastic.
And the university, underwrote some of the costs, so that was cool. But
that sounds amazing.
It just happened over the weekend, fresh in my mind. But one of the other areas I wanted to get to, because I know a lot of our colleagues think about it all the time, is the intersection of development and engagement, right? And we talk about it a lot. How do you work with the development and fundraising team at Melbourne, and how is your team involved in developing the Believe campaign?
First of all, the office at the University of Melbourne, the advancement office, is in a single location, and Alumni Relations and Advancement Services and our development teams are all located physically on one floor in one office. So that's a really important part of creating, first of all, timely communication and enabling people to share communication with each other. When we started planning for the public launch of the campaign, we immediately were talking through how we might logistically as well as financially do this in a reasonable way, given the number of alumni we had. And so this year we have integrated the launch of the campaign in different locations with alumni activity held in those locations. The reason I'm in Sydney today is because we're having the Sydney launch of the Believe campaign, which is a reception with alumni, first and foremost, which will have some other people speaking, but it will enable people to get a sense of what the campaign's about, to have a look at the video and learn something about what the aspirations of the campaign are for. For all of my US colleagues, I know this is a bit what we call Campaign 101, but here in Australia this is quite new. This is not something that people have ever gone to one of these people and said, oh, I know what we're doing. We're doing this, this. This is the first time they are likely to have been to an event like this. And similarly, we've done that in different states around Australia and internationally. We'll be in the US later on in November, and we've been in the UK earlier this year and in the Asia Pacific a couple of months ago. So really integrating our alumni program from an event perspective this year has been central. Clearly from our communications perspective, we've made sure we've really integrated not just stories about how much we want to raise, but stories about why people give, stories about some of the impacts of giving, and the impacts both on the donor as well as the impact on students or academics or on social or public outcomes. And that encourages alumni to think a little differently about their interface with the university. So we've really spent a lot of time thinking around how this will happen, including with faculty colleagues who have their own mechanisms to do the same and have been actively doing the same. Doing this in a sustained way over the coming 4 or 5 years will be our next challenge.
Yeah, do you have a number of events sort of already working on the logistics, and what is the flow of the event going to be tonight for those folks who are considering a campaign and a series of campaign events? What does an event for the University of Melbourne's Believe campaign look like?
Well, it's been interesting because, as we talked about before, for example, when we were in Asia, it was really clear from feedback that we had, as well as what we sometimes have to offer at certain points in time, that in Singapore there's a great love of fine art, there's a great love of music, and we have many students who study music who come from Singapore. And so in Singapore we had a performance by an alumnus, and we had the signing of an affiliation with a Singapore higher education institution as part of the event, and really emphasising the fact that that's one of the strengths of the university, and that was important for people in Singapore to know, in conjunction with some discussion around the campaign and what it does, and the chance to meet with members of faculty that normally wouldn't all be in one place at one time. Very different to that, in Jakarta we had a panel discussion with some of our local partners, as well as the academics from Australia that we're working with them, and it was a discussion about the university's work in Indonesia and how partnerships work and what they're trying to achieve. And so it was reinforcing some of the work that's enabled by philanthropy. It went down very well, and clearly there was a broader audience for that also in Jakarta. It's a little bit horses for courses. I don't know if that's an American phrase.
I'm not sure it is, but I like it.
We're in Melbourne Cup time here in Australia. If the running track is wet, then you need to make sure you've got a horse that likes to run on a wet running track.
Okay, all right.
So that's what horses for courses kind of. But anyway, in Sydney people do like to network. They do like to spend time talking and getting together. So the event gives emphasis on and time for people to do that tonight. It will present a couple of academics doing a small, very quick debate, picking a topic and presenting two sides of a topic for people to get a sense of a little bit of an intellectual rivalry.
Ah, I like it. That's good.
Yeah,
Now,
so
will fundraising actually happen at this event, or is it strictly engagement?
um, what we've chosen to do at all of these events is at the event, obviously people talk about how people can give. In follow-up communications to the events, we then move to how people can do that. And obviously, in addition to that, our development colleagues are making direct connections with numbers of individuals on top of that. So there's a broad outreach via communications, online and also via post, but there's also individual solicitations via development colleagues through the course of these activities happening. So it really stimulates that activity.
That's great, and I'm excited for you guys because you're about to sort of, as this sort of gets going and released to the public, right? The volume should increase, and then there's all the challenges associated with the stewardship of those gifts and the processing of those gifts, and then all of a sudden people are going to be like, well, you know, I want to give to this particular component of the university. Can we make that happen? And it's an exciting time to sort of watch it unfold for you guys. But one of the most important parts, I think, of it all is sort of the data part of it, right? And making sure that as your communications are going out and to the right people, that their physical addresses and their email addresses are all correct in your system. You know, how do you sort of emphasize to your alumni group, you know, that they need to make sure their contact information is correct, or you're not going to be able to ask them for money?
Ryan, you've just cut off, but I'm going to assume you're asking that how are we managing data and how does that connect in with our ability to fundraise?
Yes. Can you hear me again now?
Yes, I can. So,
okay, yeah, that's what I was asking, yeah.
Okay. We have a phenomenal advancement services team who are extraordinarily ahead of their game, I would suggest, here in Australia. And they have, from the outset, been entirely focused around creating as robust a data set as we can possibly have. I suppose they've worked very hand in glove with our communications team to say, over the course of a year, through X number of touch points, we have these opportunities to upgrade and update our data, and that our communications then use the fact that data is upgraded and updated at certain points of time so that we maximise our capacity in the following months to communicate effectively. So there's no point in going through a major mail out and then mailing something else out before you've actually managed to finalise the data that came from the first one, for example.
Right.
So we have a very, very conscious attempt to make sure that we're dealing with the cleanest data we possibly can. We have a number of systems where, for example, with our emails, that we upgrade our emails almost, I'd like to say virtually, and someone will say not quite, but very, very regularly sending our email blasts so that we're not sending people multiple emails even though they're no longer at their address. I think we've also spent a lot of time finding relevant activities, which mean people jump in. It's one thing to say we've got someone's address. If we run a webinar or we run an event, we've had some really great ways. We've capitalised on university sponsorship with some events, and that's brought a whole lot of people into our fray who would not have been talking with on a regular basis. And the number of self-driven data updates once people are in the system for a reason that for them is important is phenomenal. So encouraging people to come to our systems for something that they see as valuable is really critical, and making it easy for them to then update their own data is also really important. I've made some great strides in that regard.
Yeah. And so, you know, with our last 9 minutes of showtime, Leonie, I wanted to ask you about the Alumni Council at the University of Melbourne, and then I wanted to sort of ask you to offer me your take sort of more broadly as to the what you're most excited about with respect to alumni relations in Australia. So how is the rollout of your Alumni Council? What do they do at the University of Melbourne? And then what gets you most excited about your work?
All right. Our council is an interesting entity. I'm going to try and truncate 160 years of history here, but originally we had a committee of convocation which was established along with the University Act when the university was established. And for a while alumni almost basically were the Senate. They basically almost ran the university in its early days. Over the years this evolved to a point where they became a large group of about 45 people, who then over time had less actual governance authority, but retained a very strong affinity for the institution. And a couple of years ago, I'm not sure if this is the case in the States, Ryan, but here universities come under state law, and the state wanted to unify its laws in relation to universities. And the University of Melbourne was a little bit of an anomaly. So this former committee of convocation was formally taken out of the Act, and as a result, the university created a new Alumni Council. That council is about 1/3 the size of the previous iteration. I'm going to suggest that it's a lot more nimble, and it's focused itself on very much aligning itself with the Alumni Relations strategy. It's taken a really proactive look at what it can do to enhance the student experience, what it can do to enhance advocacy for the university, how it realised very quickly in talking to lots of different people across the university and amongst alumni that mentoring is a really big enabler, and its first 2 years it spent a lot of time seeing how it can expand the capacity of alumni to make a difference in those areas, and it's been quite active. It's been a difficult time because it's been new, and we've had a lot of discussion about what is the role of the council. What should it be doing? Should it be a practical body? Should it be governance oriented? Should it be university wide? Or should it be focusing and supporting the alumni and advancement office? And I think we're at a point now where they're quite comfortable that they do play some active role, but they're not operational. They want to guide, they want to bring people together, but they're not a body that actually runs their own programs. It's not an alumni association in that traditional sense. I think that is often the case in the US. So there's 16 members, some from all over the world, who email in at bizarre hours of the morning, depending on where they're located. But they're very committed and increasingly, as I said, focused on doing a few things well rather than trying to be all things to all people.
Well, that's awesome. I hope that continues to strengthen, and you find that the group comes together on a mission to however you deploy them.
Yeah, I think they're also what's a good word for it? They're also over time becoming more comfortable with the notion that they are models and ambassadors for other alumni to look to. I think initially, I'm not sure they all saw themselves in that role, but over time they've become more comfortable thinking of themselves as ambassadors as opposed to arbitrators, perhaps.
And are all these folks donors?
We had an interesting discussion about that the other day. A good majority of them are. We had a discussion last week, in fact, amongst them as to whether, as part of the formal job description, which we've recently revised, that a requirement be that people should give, and the consensus amongst the group was that we shouldn't make this a mandatory requirement. That it was an interesting discussion. Various people, some of whom are very, very generous with their time elsewhere, have said, I want my time to be valued as much as whatever I might give. And these are people who put in enormous hours for the university in ways that we couldn't possibly describe, and are ambassadors for some very important groups of people the university wants to support. And there were others who I thought might have instantly said yes, who didn't, and who said, I'd hate to think of this as a fee for having to be part of something I'm already part of. So we had a robust discussion, the conclusion of which is I'm sure the majority of them will still continue to give, but we're not making it a mandatory or compulsory component.
Nice. I'm glad I asked that question. Sounds like it was a fresh thought.
Yeah, no, it was. And again, this all helps in people reaffirming why they're there, what they need to be doing, what they're committing. So it was good. Yeah. What am I most excited about?
Yeah.
Australia is in a new era here of higher education and where it's headed. And the last 18 months, I think, for Australia has really driven that home. There have been cuts to education here that have made it very clear to members of the public that the paradigm has shifted in Australia. And that's meant people have thought hard about the value of higher education and are, I think, giving a lot of thought to it, particularly those who have a higher education experience. So there's a great opportunity for Alumni Relations to capitalise and bring people into that fold and encourage support of whatever sort that might look like. If you asked people whether we should be doing away with higher education or we should be minimising it, I think you find a very, very strong degree of support from the population, and that's raising people's awareness of their status as alumni. It's not an oft-used word in Australia, but it's increasingly becoming one that people are open to and want to be invited into in a meaningful way. So we've got a lot of opportunity before us. We need to be pretty robust around how we demonstrate why that's good both for alumni and for universities. Measurement and, dare I say, return on investment, but what's the end result of all of this activity is still something that we grapple with and we need to be articulate about. And the other thing is that for those people working in the field, there's definitely it's a growth area for professionals to be working in. We have 39 universities. 39 universities are in a zone they weren't 4 years ago and really wanting to try and do this in a systematic and a strategic way. So there's a great opportunity.
Yeah. It's really exciting. One of the things the thoughts that I sort of have in running through my head all the times about our work is that, I want University of Virginia alumni to think of themselves, I'm a husband, I am a father, and I am a graduate of the University of Virginia, and it is part of their personal brand. It is part of their story. It is part of who they are. And it's a real challenge, right? Particularly because everybody sort of falls at a different place in that spectrum. Yeah. And you're trying to figure out where people are and move them along the way. And somewhere along that spectrum, right, is attending an event, and somewhere along that spectrum is giving money. And that's so right. We have fun work. We really do. I think is in our world of alumni relations. And Leonie, I appreciate your time very, very much. That was a great chat, and you did a tremendous job.
I want to thank you. You've done lots of the legwork. In fact, the lion's share, Ryan. So it's been great to talk, and I've learned a lot from the clear path that you've blazed. You and many institutions provide us with a lot of aspiration. At times we're so far ahead we wonder if we'll ever catch up, but at the same time there is so much useful information and sharing that can happen as we evolve a hybrid model of what alumni relations looks like in Australia. And so this kind of discussion I think is really useful in helping that to evolve. So thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure. I did want to show, sort of in closing, the alumni website here at the University of Virginia. And if anyone has a chance to take a look, to check out some of the programs, this is our recently built UVA Global Network site that has a lot of our clubs, initiatives, and it would be I would be remiss if I didn't. I'd be remiss if I didn't share it with everybody, right?
Wow, that's amazing. And just looking at that map of everyone across the US, which is impressive in its own right.
It's cool. I'm very lucky to have a chance to work with my colleagues at the University of Virginia. Leonie, I'll let you go. I'm sure it's about lunchtime, right? And
It sure is.
After that frantic scramble down the elevator to the lobby to get juiced up to the internet, I have no doubt that you're hungry. So.
Well, thank you for being patient about the coffee and the other cranky noises in the background. So.
No, I think it was great. It was good. It was good show noise. But all right, Leonie, and everybody who's tuned in for the first time over in Australia, I hope you really enjoyed it. Please pass around the video from the archives, and I will post it up there either tonight or tomorrow when I get back to my work. But from the U.S. here in Virginia, have a great night. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. Thanks again.